Welcome back. I'm the professor, Dr. Chris McCusker, and welcome to another episode in the Quarantine Management Institute. We're talking about leadership, and specifically, we're going to talk about one aspect of heroic leadership. Heroic leadership is about the qualities of character that a leader should develop or emphasize in order to succeed in a particular situation. We're talking about a crisis situation, the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'd like to emphasize a particular quality of character which is known as optimism. And I'd like to do so by drawing attention to a story, one of the greatest stories ever told in leadership. And that's the story of Ernest Shackleton and the voyage of the Endurance. A great resource on this would be a book by Dennis Perkins, who's a well-known public speaker and consultant on leadership. His book is called Leading at the Edge, and it tells in a very thoughtful way the story of Shackleton, and then also points to 8 lessons from the Shackleton expedition that everybody should know. One thing I'd like to emphasize here, however, is heroic leadership, thinking about character, and what the Shackleton story teaches us about that. The issue for us is optimism. Shackleton is someone I would call pathologically optimistic. The story, in a nutshell, I can't go into the whole story here. It's an extensive story. You have the Perkins book. You also have a documentary on the Endurance, which is available, narrated by Liam Neeson. Fantastic documentary. There are also other resources. If you Google Shackleton, you can read about this expedition. Now, Shackleton had 27 men, and they boarded a ship in England, and they sailed to Antarctica. It was the heroic age of discovery, and Shackleton and his crew were trying to be the first to discover the South Pole. They wanted to put the British flag right on the South Pole. And Shackleton had tried a couple times before and failed for different reasons. What happened on this particular expedition, the Endurance, was Shackleton's ship with the men got stuck in the ice. It was 20 degrees above zero. One evening they went to sleep, and in the morning it was 20 degrees below zero, and the ship was surrounded by ice. They desperately tried to get the ship out. They could not. They didn't have dynamite. They used their picks and shovels and tried to break it out of the ice. They couldn't. They sheltered on the ice for many months, and that's not really what makes the story that great. A lot of people could have, it's like a hotel you got there, but you're in the ice. But what happened was that the ship crumbled. And then they were stuck on the ice. They had lifeboats, they had tents, they had dogs, they had anything they could carry. To make a long story short, Shackleton somehow managed to lead these men, 27 men, back to safety. They all got back to Great Britain alive, which in the history of polar exploration is unheard of. They were supposed to, for example, meet a party on the other side of Antarctica, and just getting to that spot on the other side of Antarctica resulted in several of that party being dead. People died during polar expeditions. It was what happened. But Shackleton somehow managed to get all of these men back to safety, and they endured horrible conditions, freezing cold month after month. They didn't have modern equipment. They were wet, they were cold, they were tired, they were starving. But somehow they all got back. And one thing that Shackleton did was that he insisted that anybody who joined him in the expedition was, like Shackleton, pathologically optimistic. It was the one thing that everybody had to have in common. If they weren't optimists, they were not selected for this journey. Shackleton knew that it could go horribly wrong and that optimism was needed. So one thing I'd like to emphasize when it comes to a crisis, and this is something that we learned from Sir Ernest Shackleton and the voyage of the Endurance, that if you want to survive a crisis, you've got to be optimistic. In the next episode, I'll talk about learned optimism, which is an issue that has been studied by Martin Seligman, and I'm optimistic because optimism is something that we can all learn. But read the Shackleton, dive in, Google, get the Perkins book. It's worth your time.